The Gulf region is clouded with war, and the US-Iran standoff is at a critical juncture. Trump is deploying strategic forces to exert pressure while releasing signals for diplomatic negotiations. Iran, on the other hand, is on high alert with its comprehensive missile capabilities. At this tense yet promising moment, China's clear stance has broken the deadlock and altered America's strategic calculations. Behind this global game-changing confrontation lie 6 key facts that will determine the direction of the regional situation. In terms of military deployment, the US has taken increasingly targeted and large-scale actions, fully revealing its preparations for potential military operations. The Pentagon has submitted a broader range of military options to Trump, covering strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and ballistic missile bases. According to authoritative sources, the operational activity of military aircraft such as B-52 bombers and KC-135 tankers at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar has significantly increased recently. U.S. Special Forces, Aegis destroyers, and nuclear submarines have also completed pre-deployment in relevant areas, with their combat readiness level significantly enhanced. As one of the core forces of U.S. strategic deterrence, the B-52 bomber possesses powerful long-range strike capabilities, and its increased deployment in the Middle East is undoubtedly a direct military deterrent to Iran. Meanwhile, the simultaneous deployment of KC-135 tanker fleets can provide air refueling support for long-range combat aircraft, ensuring that U.S. warplanes can conduct long-duration, long-distance military operations without range restrictions, laying the groundwork for potential sustained strikes or strategic deterrence. In addition to Air Force deployments, U.S. military preparations on the ground and at sea are advancing simultaneously. In terms of reconnaissance and strike system construction, the U.S. military's drone, satellite reconnaissance, and sea-based cruise missile systems have been fully activated, forming a complete strike chain covering air, space, sea, and land. Drones can perform precise reconnaissance and targeted strike missions. Satellite reconnaissance systems can achieve real-time monitoring of Iran's entire territory and surrounding areas. And sea-based cruise missiles can launch long-range strikes on Iranian targets. From the sea, the coordination of multidimensional military forces has pushed U.S. military pressure on Iran to its highest level in recent times. It should be noted that there are currently no signs of large-scale U.S. military buildup near Iran, and no aircraft carriers are deployed in the Persian Gulf. This has become a key factor restricting the U.S. from launching full-scale military operations. Notably, while the Trump administration maintains a tough stance of pressure, new diplomatic negotiation dynamics have emerged in the situation. Previously, the outside world speculated that it intended to repeat the quick strike and quick withdrawal military script in the Middle East. This strategy, derived from the U.S.'s summary of past military operations, aims to achieve deterrence and strategic goals through small-scale, high-intensity military strikes while avoiding prolonged wars. However, according to the latest authoritative information, on January 12 local time, White House Press Secretary Leavitt clearly stated that diplomatic channels are the Trump administration's preferred option for addressing the Iran situation. But if necessary, the president will not hesitate to use U.S. military forces, demonstrating a dual stance of negotiation alongside pressure. The scope of the military plan submitted by the Pentagon may exceed the U.S. air strikes on relevant targets in June last year, but it is more likely to prioritize limited measures such as cyberattacks and targeted strikes, with the clear exclusion of dispatching ground troops. In addition, Trump previously revealed that Iran had taken the initiative to propose negotiations, and relevant meetings are being arranged, while emphasizing that he does not rule out the possibility of taking action before the talks. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi also responded on the 12th that Iran is willing to engage in dialogue on the principles of fairness, equality, and mutual respect, while being fully prepared for war. These new developments indicate that the U.S.-Iran situation is not simply moving toward military confrontation, but presenting a complex pattern of military pressure combined with diplomatic negotiations. Although the Trump administration's tough deployments have heightened regional tensions, It has not completely abandoned the possibility of a diplomatic solution. On the same day, the U.S. State Department issued an emergency alert, urging U.S. citizens in Iran to leave immediately in preparation for a potential escalation of the situation. Iran's counterattack capabilities are not to be underestimated, and it has shown firm determination to resist. It has made thorough preparations to respond to potential U.S. military strikes, covering military force reserves, strategic defense system construction, and relevant deployments. First, in terms of weapons and equipment reserves, Iran possesses the largest missile arsenal in the Middle East, equipped with a large number of short-range and medium-range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. This is a key reason why the U.S. is hesitant about escalating the conflict. Specifically, the Shahab-3 missile has a range of 1,800 kilometers. The Gad-2 missile has a range of 2,500 kilometers. And the Fatu-110 tactical missile boasts extremely high strike precision. These missiles have strong combat effectiveness and can effectively deter targets in the region. Iran's missile strike capabilities have been combat-proven in past conflicts, demonstrating the ability to accurately hit key U.S. military base targets. Major U.S. facilities such as the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia are all within the strike range of Iranian missiles. The Iranian parliament has even issued a direct warning, listing U.S. and Israeli military bases in the Middle East as legitimate targets. In constructing its strategic defense system, Iran has fully leveraged its topographical advantages to build a comprehensive defense network. Iran's terrain is complex, dominated by mountains and plateaus, providing natural conditions for the construction of underground defense facilities. Iran has built numerous underground missile depots, mountain bunkers, and is equipped with mobile missile launch vehicles. These facilities make it difficult for the U.S. to implement its decapitation plan. Underground missile depots and mountain bunkers can effectively withstand U.S. air strikes, while mobile launch vehicles can achieve flexible deployment and rapid transfer, avoiding precise positioning and destruction by the U.S. military. Even if the U.S. dispatches advanced drones for precision strikes, it is difficult to ensure a fatal blow to Iran's key military targets. Iran's strategic defense system provides solid security guarantees for the country. Iran has relevant cooperative political and military forces in the region, forming a certain regional linkage network that is regarded by the outside world as an important strategic support for Iran to respond to external threats. Iran has close cooperative forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and other countries. And groups such as the Houthi rebels in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon are considered to have ties with Iran. From the current situation, the actual linkage capability of this network is uncertain. If the U.S. launches military strikes against Iran, it cannot be ruled out that these affiliated forces may take corresponding actions. But the specific scale and method of action cannot be accurately predicted, and there is no clear information indicating that they have made targeted deployments recently. In terms of resolve to resist, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps IRGC has clearly stated that any U.S. military action will be regarded as an all-out war. This statement clearly conveys Iran's determination to defend national sovereignty and interests at all costs. Recently, Iran's missile forces have entered the highest state of combat readiness. Airspace over Tehran has been fully restricted, and all military flights are on standby around the clock, showing a high level of alertness. According to satellite images released by Western media, Iran has deployed a large number of long-range rockets and cruise missiles along the Strait of Hormuz. The coverage of these weapons is sufficient to strike major U.S. forward bases in the Middle East, including Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain. As a key channel for global energy transportation, the security situation of the Strait of Hormuz is closely related to the global economy. Iran's military deployment in this region has further enhanced its leverage to counter the U.S. Iranian Army Chief of Staff Hatami also clearly stated that after previous conflicts, the combat effectiveness of Iran's armed forces has been significantly improved. Over the past 6 months, the Iranian military has made targeted preparations in response to relevant threats and currently has the ability to respond to various security challenges. China has clearly stated its opposition to unilateral military actions and hegemonic logic. This stance, clearly conveyed through official channels, not only inherits China's consistent diplomatic philosophy but also injects a force for peace and balance into the tense US-Iran situation. Faced with the escalating US-Iran tensions, China did not choose to remain silent but took the initiative to speak out through diplomatic channels to clearly express its position and propositions. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning clearly stated that China firmly opposes interference in other countries' internal affairs, opposes the use or threat of use of force in international relations, and hopes that all parties will do more to promote peace and stability in the Middle East. This statement directly targets the US's tendency to resort to military threats and pursue unilateralism in international affairs, demonstrating its commitment to safeguarding the international order based on international law. China's statement is not an isolated diplomatic voice but is based on the fundamental goals of safeguarding the international nuclear non-proliferation regime, maintaining peace and stability in the Middle East, and upholding multilateralism and the authority of the United Nations. China has always believed that safeguarding and implementing the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action JCPOA on the Iranian nuclear issue is the correct way to resolve the issue. Iran's reduction in fulfilling its JCPOA obligations is a result of US maximum pressure. All parties to the JCPOA should strengthen dialogue and consultation within the framework of the Joint Commission, seek solutions to performance disputes in accordance with the step-by-step and reciprocal approach, and restore the balance between rights and obligations under the JCPOA. This proposition provides a practical path for resolving US-Iran disputes, forming a sharp contrast with the US's military pressure strategy. China's position has also been widely recognized by the international community. The vast majority of UN Security Council members opposed the US proposed draft resolution to extend the arms embargo on Iran, believing that the JCPOA and UN Security Council Resolution 2231 should be effectively safeguarded and implemented. Ambassador Zhang Jun, China's permanent representative to the United Nations, has clearly pointed out that the US draft resolution essentially seeks to reimpose sanctions on Iran, which is a continuation of its maximum pressure policy, contrary to the spirit of the JCPOA, and has no legal basis or justification. China's vote against the draft resolution is precisely to safeguard the authority of Security Council resolutions, the international nuclear non-proliferation regime, and regional peace and stability. China's statements and actions have injected rational and peaceful forces into the tense US-Iran situation, avoided further escalation of the situation, and set an example for the international community to resolve disputes through diplomatic channels. Two core concerns of the US have gradually emerged. On the one hand, the fear of underestimating Iran's counterattack capabilities. On the other hand, the worry of falling into a no-win war dilemma. These two concerns stem from the US's understanding of Iran's actual strength and its assessment of its own internal and external conditions. First, the US is increasingly worried about underestimating Iran's counterattack capabilities. This worry is not unfounded but based on Iran's actual military strength and strategic layout. Unlike Iraq, Libya, and other countries that have been militarily struck by the US in the past, Iran has complex terrain, a long front line, and sufficient missile reserves, making it difficult for US military strikes to achieve the desired results. Iran's counterattack capabilities are reflected not only in its own military strength but also in its flexible counterattack strategies. Iran does not need to declare war publicly. It only needs to activate relevant linkage networks to put US military bases and Israel in a two-front war. Iran's strategic defense system is not a mere formality. Underground missile depots and mountain bunkers can effectively withstand US airstrikes, and mobile launch vehicles can avoid precise positioning. These facilities make it difficult for the US to implement its decapitation plan. Even if the US dispatches advanced drones for precision strikes, it is hard to ensure a fatal blow to Iran's key military targets. Iran's military deployments have strong strike resistance and survivability. More realistically, once a war breaks out, Iranian domestic nationalist sentiment will soar immediately, and the people will spontaneously unite to resist external threats, which will instead consolidate the current Iranian regime. This is a lesson learned from the Trump administration's failure in Venezuela. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela not only failed to achieve the desired goals but also aroused anti-US sentiment among local people, consolidating the ruling foundation of the local regime. The second concern is the U.S.'s fear of a no-win war, which stems from a clear understanding of Iran's war potential and its own internal and external conditions. Unlike the Taliban, which can only engage in guerrilla warfare, or Syria, which is overly dependent on external assistance, Iran has the ability to fight a regular war and can withstand the consumption of a prolonged war. Iran has a complete military-industrial system and can independently produce various types of weapons and equipment. Although affected by economic sanctions, it has strong self-sufficiency capabilities in key military fields, providing a guarantee for its ability to wage a prolonged war. Even if the U.S. can successfully strike some of Iran's military targets through air strikes, it cannot fundamentally solve the problem. Instead, it will trigger a stronger counterattack from Iran, dragging the U.S. into a war quagmire. Domestically in the U.S., there are obvious divisions over military intervention in Iran. Currently, the U.S. is facing severe economic pressures with high inflation, prominent people's livelihood issues, and increased social division. In this context, the American public is generally unwilling to pay for a war with unclear outcomes. During the election campaign, the Trump administration promised to keep the U.S. away from overseas wars, but its current tough stance has aroused dissatisfaction among some domestic people and legislators. Many U.S. legislators have stated their opposition to launching military attacks on Iran, believing that this is not the U.S.'s best strategy. In addition, U.S. allies also hold a cautious attitude toward U.S. military actions. Most U.S. allies are unwilling to see the U.S. use force against Iran, worrying that this will further undermine regional security and stability and trigger unpredictable consequences. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid El-Ansari clearly stated that any escalation of the conflict between the U.S. and Iran will bring catastrophic consequences to regional security, urging both parties to exercise restraint and resolve differences through diplomatic channels. These internal and external factors have made the U.S. hesitant about using force against Iran, fearing that it will fall into a no-win war dilemma. At the same time, the current U.S. national security strategy focuses on strategic contraction, and large-scale military operations are inconsistent with its positioning of the Middle East as a non-core priority, further restricting its choice of military actions. The strategic impact of China's statement is far-reaching. It is equivalent to drawing a red line beside the Middle East situation, increasing the political cost of U.S. military actions, precisely targeting the U.S.'s strategic weaknesses, while aligning with the demands of global South countries and raising international expectations for the peaceful resolution of disputes. China's statement is not a high-profile pressure tactic but increases the political cost of U.S. military actions by clearly opposing unilateralism, upholding the authority of the UN Charter, and calling for peaceful dialogue. In the current international context where multilateralism is increasingly advocated and unilateralism is opposed, U.S. military actions need to gain legitimacy recognition from the international community. China's statement directly weakens the legitimacy basis of U.S. military actions. Once China leads the condemnation of U.S. unilateral actions in the United Nations or among global South countries, the U.S. will face enormous international public opinion pressure, and the international environment for its military actions will further deteriorate. As the world's most authoritative international organization, the United Nations' position and attitude play an important guiding role in the international community. China's voice in the United Nations can drive more countries to recognize the harm of U.S. unilateral actions, thereby forming an international consensus opposing U.S. military actions. Global South countries have long suffered from unilateralism and hegemonism and have long been dissatisfied with U.S. unilateral actions. They are more inclined to a stable, predictable world order not dominated by hegemony. China's position aligns with the demands of global South countries and has won wide recognition and support from these countries. China has always adhered to the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs and advocated resolving international disputes through dialogue and consultation. This approach forms a sharp contrast with the US's hegemonic logic, providing global South countries with an alternative choice for the international order. China's statement also precisely targets the US's strategic weaknesses. The US attempts to deter Iran through a quick strike and quick withdrawal military operation. But China's involvement increases the political risks and international costs of its military actions. If the US disregards China's position and international condemnation and insists on using force against Iran, it will face severe diplomatic isolation, and its global strategic credibility will be further damaged. U.S. military actions in the Middle East require the support and cooperation of regional countries, and China's statement will influence the attitudes of regional countries, making more regional countries adopt a cautious or opposing attitude toward U.S. military actions, thereby increasing the difficulty of U.S. military operations. In addition, China's position has also created an opportunity for the international community to resolve U.S.-Iran disputes through diplomatic channels. China calls on all parties to the JCPOA to strengthen dialogue and consultation within the framework of the Joint Commission and seek solutions to performance disputes in accordance with the step-by-step and reciprocal approach. This proposition has been supported by most countries. The international community generally believes that diplomacy is the most effective way to resolve regional crises. Among them, Qatar's diplomatic mediation efforts are particularly active. On January 13 local time, Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari clearly stated that any escalation of the conflict between the US and Iran will bring catastrophic consequences to regional security, urging both parties to exercise restraint and resolve differences through diplomatic channels. At the same time, Qatar is working with regional neighbors and international partners to resolve differences between the two sides and ease regional tensions. China's statements and actions provide strong support for these diplomatic efforts, promoting the international community to form a good atmosphere of encouraging peace and promoting negotiations, and avoiding further escalation of the US-Iran situation. The key logic determining the direction of the situation has changed. The outcome of modern wars no longer depends solely on the number of weapons but more on the ability to sustain combat. The US has learned lessons from past miscalculations such as the Afghan war currently. International public opinion and the attitudes of the international community do not support its use of force. Rational dialogue is the fundamental way to resolve disputes. The form of modern warfare has undergone profound changes. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia has shown the world that modern warfare is no longer about who has more planes or heavier tanks, but about who can hold out longer and fight more steadily. Sustainable combat capability includes not only the continuous supply of military forces but also economic endurance and public support. Although Iran is affected by economic sanctions, it has sufficient flexibility in drone technology, cyber attacks, and guerrilla tactics. Historical lessons have also sounded an alarm for U.S. military actions. In the Afghan war, the U.S. stepped into the battlefield driven by the sentiment of needing to respond. After 20 years of fighting, it not only failed to win the war but also lost its strategic credibility, consuming a huge amount of manpower, material resources, and financial resources. The U.S. military operation in Afghanistan ultimately ended in failure, dealing a heavy blow to the U.S.'s international image and domestic economy. Trump keeps saying he wants to make America great again. But he forgets that greatness does not only come from bombs and aircraft carriers, but more from judgment. Once the U.S. miscalculates on Iran and rashly launches a military strike, It may drag the US into a deeper quagmire than Vietnam or Iraq. In the current international environment of information explosion and social media-dominated public opinion, any military operation may be infinitely magnified, becoming an uncontrollable public relations disaster for the government. Trump's tough stance may win applause from some domestic people, but once a war breaks out, with the increase in casualties and war costs, domestic backlash, the international community also generally opposes U.S. military action against Iran. Most countries believe that diplomacy is the most effective way to resolve regional crises, calling on both the U.S. and Iran to exercise restraint and resolve differences through dialogue and consultation. China's voice is precisely striving for space for peace and a warning to unilateralism. The direction of the Middle East situation no longer depends solely on the speed of warplanes taking off, but more on whether reason is still at the helm. If all parties can return to the track of dialogue and consultation, it will be the fundamental way to resolve disputes. The JCPOA is an important achievement of multilateral diplomacy. Safeguarding and implementing the JCPOA is the correct way to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue. All parties should strengthen communication and consultation within the framework of the Joint Commission to promote the Iranian nuclear issue back to the track of political and diplomatic resolution.